I am asking you, sir. Do not ignore me, Mr. Jordan. Do you truly believe that your initiative, meets the standards of South Carolina? Do you fit the description of one entitled to own these streets, or do you not? His final sentence was laced with veiled but obvious contempt, requiring no further explanation. Michael felt a slow burn ignite inside him, yet his upbringing taught him that silence was often the loudest retort. He remained quiet. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes flashing. Hands where I can see him! Step away from the vehicle. I'm standing right here. Don't you be disrespectful. He seemed to be shouting, though his voice was only slightly raised. In that moment, the silence was so deafening that everyone present could hear the rapid beat of their own hearts. Wait a minute. That's a badge. Damn. Federal. Now, can we talk? Thorne stumbled, his smile momentarily dissolving before returning, even more false than before. Michael, taking a deep breath, replied quietly, Gentlemen, we are not here to play games. That is all I have to say, for now. It appeared to be a standard business meeting, but the air hung heavy with a pressure that even the sunlight filtering through the windows seemed unable to pierce. To understand what had truly happened, and why Michael B. Jordan, a man known for his composure and philanthropy, found himself on the brink of a public confrontation in the historic heart of Charleston, one had to go back several months. Before that, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment when you watch this video. Now let's go back a few months. Michael B. Jordan was tired of the bright lights of Los Angeles. Not of the work, he loved his craft, but of the incessant noise, the superficiality, and the endless pursuit of fleeting attention. He wanted his actions to carry weight, his money and his name to yield benefit, not just visibility. He possessed a quiet, unyielding strength that required no external validation. He believed in the principle of doing right, even when no one is watching. One rainy evening, while reviewing financial statements, an investment opportunity in Charleston, South Carolina, caught his eye. It was the historic section of the city, known as the Battery, where ancestral homes with their piazzas and gardens abutted commercial properties, all owned by a single holding company, Ascension Properties. Michael discovered that 40% of the holding company's shares were up for sale. It was a significant stake, securing him a seat on the board of directors and the ability to influence leasing policy. His vision was simple: to protect the local entrepreneurs. The small bookstore, the family-run antique shop, the old coffee house that smelled of nutmeg and decades of good faith. He watched as these places were being forced out by soulless chain stores, and he wanted to preserve the soul of this city, its authentic, non-tourist facade. This was his mission, not to profit, but to protect. If you want to change the world, Mike, start in your own backyard. He often recalled his mother's words. This purchase was his backyard. He closed the deal swiftly, without fanfare, investing a substantial portion of his own, honestly earned capital. His lawyers were certain 40% was significant control, guaranteeing that no major decision could be made without his consent. He hadn't personally vetted every document. He trusted. They're just business papers, not a blockbuster script. He had smiled then. Afterward, he flew to Charleston himself. His initial meeting with the majority 60% owner, Elias Thorne, took place a week later. Thorne was the embodiment of old money and power, aged, gray-haired, with a perfectly pressed suit and an accent that delivered, "Ma'am," and "Sir," with such condescension that they sounded like insults. "Mr. Jordan," Thorne drawled during their first handshake, "we are pleased to see such fresh capital here. But Charleston ain't Hollywood. Traditions write the rules here. I trust you understand that, sir." "I am here to respect the traditions, sir," Michael replied softly, looking Thorne directly in the eye. "But tradition doesn't exclude growth and decency." Thorne only offered his shark-like smile. Michael felt the first, faint chill of doubt. He thought he had seen everything, but this time, he was mistaken. In the weeks following the purchase, Michael began his work. He quietly met with the tenants, Mrs. O'Connor from the Book Nook, whose shop had stood on that spot for 70 years, elderly Mr. Samuels, who sold handmade bow ties. He promised them stable rents, long-term leases, even offered to upgrade their utility systems at his own expense. His goodwill was met only with quiet suspicion. "That sounds too good, sir," Mrs. O'Connor said, trying not to look him in the face. "Nothing good happens here without a catch, especially when you got Elias Thorne looking over your shoulder." Thorne didn't act overtly. He operated like an architect, creating invisible pressure. When Michael proposed a landscaping project, Thorne blocked it on the grounds of insufficient conformity to historical standards. When Michael tried to install new utility meters, Thorne declared it was a violation of the city-owned electrical system. Every step Michael took, driven by good intentions, hit a wall of bureaucracy, with Thorne standing right behind it. Michael grew frustrated. "Why is it so hard just to do good, ma'am?" he asked his local council one day. "Because you're good, Mr. Jordan, is their control, sir," the lawyer replied. "Thorne don't want anyone showing that things can be done different. The rules here ain't written. They are felt." This was the moment Michael decided to reread every document, every subclause of the agreement his lawyers had signed. He sat in his rented apartment, where the smell of saltwater mixed with the scent of old paper. He didn't sleep for 2 days, consumed by dry legal jargon. His tension mounted. This was no mere business transaction. It was a war of principles. He felt his quiet strength being tested. He was alone against the crowd, but the crowd didn't see that he was there. At dawn on the third day, he found it. A tiny, seemingly innocuous clause, buried on page 314, within the section on minority shareholder liability. It wasn't just a clause, it was a trap. The Aesthetic Integrity Mandate AIM. The clause granted Thorne, as the majority owner, 60%, the right to initiate an independent review of moral and aesthetic standards compliance on any property controlled by the minority shareholder, Michael. If the assessment board, consisting of 3 members appointed by Thorne, found even one of Michael's properties to be in substantial violation of the spirit and integrity of historic Charleston, Thorne had the right to unilaterally activate the demolition and redevelopment mandate. This meant he could forcibly buy out all 40% of Michael's stake at a price significantly below market value and clear the land. This was not a business risk. It was a social ambush. Michael felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "My God," he whispered. "They did this on purpose." He realized that his meekness and trust in the system had been interpreted as naivety. Thorne knew. He knew Michael would buy based on emotion, not just financial expediency. He knew Michael would support the unhistoric and outdated small businesses that did not conform to Thorne's vision of an elite Charleston. He knew Michael would create the perfect excuse to activate AIM. Michael understood that his good intentions were being pitted against an abuse of power, masked by sophisticated legal language. Meanwhile, Thorne began to act. He initiated rumors about the Hollywood developer who had come to tear down our old world. He sent anonymous letters to tenants, warning that Michael wanted to turn their shops into modern yoga studios. The social environment began to drift away. Mrs. O'Connor refused his offer of repairs. Mr. Samuel stopped greeting him. Michael became the unwanted truth-teller, whose good intentions only fueled the rumors. His sense of isolation grew. "Folks don't want to hear bad news, sir," Thorne told him once at a charity gala. "They want to believe everything will stay the same. And I give him that faith. You give him change. Change they didn't ask for." Michael said nothing. But his internal monologue was loud. I'm not here to tear down. I'm here to protect what you've already ruined with your arrogance. Then Thorne struck. He publicly announced that the assessment board would conduct its first review. The target was Mrs. O'Connor's book nook, the oldest and most beloved, but arguably the least aesthetically compliant business in the block, as its facade was over a century old. It was the perfect target. It was meant to break Michael. He didn't know how far this would go, but he knew this was the moment his quiet strength had to become loud. The next morning, the studio doors were already locked from the inside, but his door was open. The day of the review arrived under a dark, humid sky. Michael arrived at the book nook. Mrs. O'Connor stood by the door, her face strained and guilty. She avoided eye contact. I apologize, sir, she whispered. I was told it might be better if you weren't here. They say your presence might make things worse. Michael just nodded. I understand, ma'am, but I won't leave. If I lose standing right beside you. The board arrived. 3 men in expensive, anonymous suits, led by Elias Thorne, who claimed to be merely an honorary observer. The board began their inspection, their faces emotionless, their movements cold. They photographed cracks in the stucco, rusty downspouts, sun-faded signs. They meticulously documented every sign of insufficient integrity. Then Thorne stepped out in front of the reporters who had suddenly appeared. We are not here to punish, but to protect. This is the only way to save the true Charleston from commercial chaos. He threw Michael a look of sheer triumph. Michael stood like a rock. He felt rage inside, but outwardly, only an unyielding resolve. He waited for the moment they would deliver the final blow. He knew his only chance wasn't to prove them legally wrong, but morally. The board chairman, Dr. Allenby, a man with a severe face, turned to Michael, holding printouts of the photographs. Mr. Jordan, our board has concluded its preliminary review. We have reached an unambiguous opinion. He paused. The smell of wet earth and old wood filled the air. We find these properties to be in clear violation of the letter of our mandate. Allenby spoke slowly, every word a hammer blow. Their condition and, dare I say, their nature threatens integrity. We conclude you have failed this review, sir. Thorne smiled, this time without a hint of restraint. It was pure triumph. He walked up to Michael. What in the hell do you think you're doing, you damn developer? Do you even know who I am? Folks like you are supposed to do the dirty work, not manage. This is the end, Michael. I am now activating the demolition mandate. Rage exploded within Michael like a supernova. He cried out, not with words, but with clarity. His gaze met Mrs. O'Connor's, who finally raised her eyes. In them, there was no fear, just sadness. Michael could take no more. His mind went wild, but not with aggression, with absolute clarity. He addressed Thorne. Tear it down? Fine. But you forgot one thing. What? Thorne asked mockingly. You forgot that I don't just own 40% of the land. I also own the rights to all the underground utilities serving the entire block, all the way to the battery. And, Mr. Thorne, I just activated the clause for a temporary shutdown of all utilities for an emergency repair caused by the violation of the city-owned electrical system, the phrase you yourself used against me. Michael pressed a button on his phone. The entire street went silent. Horror froze Thorne's face. But the real storm was just beginning. Michael knew this desperate move would either save him or ruin one of their careers, but this was not the end. The humid Charleston morning, which had been buzzing with reporters and the low hum of business, went dead. The ancient gas lamps in the street remained lit, but the crisp, powerful central air conditioning, the registers, the modern security systems, the cash registers, and the electric signs of every luxury boutique Elias Thorne had installed across the entire historic block, they all collapsed into stillness. Elias Thorne's jaw dropped. His polished facade shattered. He stared at the darkened storefronts, then back at Michael B. Jordan, whose hand was still resting on the phone he had used to initiate the emergency shutdown. "What in God's name did you just do?" Thorne's voice was a low, dangerous hiss, stripped of its aristocratic drawl, revealing only raw, panic power. "As I said, Mr. Thorne," Michael replied, his voice calm yet carrying the force of a battering ram. "I activated the clause for an emergency utility shutdown. Your own legal team, the same one that drafted the aesthetic integrity mandate, placed a provision in the minority shareholder agreement granting me unilateral control over the underground infrastructure's maintenance. A provision, I might add, made necessary because the majority owner, you, failed to properly maintain the systems for decades." The three members of the assessment board, Dr. Allenby, Dr. Vance, and Miss Chen, were now visibly sweating. They were bureaucrats, not crisis managers. A prolonged power outage in this city's most valuable block was not just an inconvenience. It was a front-page scandal that threatened their careers. "The board has just declared my property, the Book Nook, a clear violation of the spirit and integrity of historic Charleston," Michael continued, his eyes locked on Thorne. "You use this violation to justify activating the demolition mandate, allowing you to seize my stake. Well, Mr. Thorne, your violation, the one that allowed the old, frayed wiring of the utility system to be exposed in Mrs. O'Connor's basement, is the actual cause for this emergency. I'm simply making the necessary repairs. And those repairs will take as long as it takes to ensure the integrity of the entire block." Michael's threat was clear. The power stays off until Thorne backs down. The silence stretched, broken only by the chirping of crickets beginning to stir, confused by the sudden darkness. Thorne lunged forward, his face purple. "You cannot do this. This is blackmail. This is an act of economic warfare." "No, Mr. Thorne," Michael corrected him, stepping closer. "This is the consequence of believing decency is weakness. You mistook my composure for naivete. I am playing by your rules, using your documents. Now we negotiate. We talk about the real purpose of this meeting, the aesthetic integrity mandate. Michael signaled his personal lawyer, Ms. Hayes, who stepped forward holding a single, heavily dog-eared sheet of paper. Ms. Hayes looked like a shark in a tailored suit, calm, precise, and utterly terrifying. "Mr. Thorne, gentlemen of the board," she began, her voice cutting through the stifling air. "You have declared that the Book Nook is in substantial violation of the mandate. We acknowledge the physical findings, the cracks, the rust. But we contest the mandate's validity as applied to this specific property." Thorne scoffed. "The mandate is ironclad. It's signed, notarized, and registered with the city. You cannot contest its application. You are merely delaying the inevitable." "We can, and we shall," Michael interrupted smoothly. He took the paper from his lawyer, his eyes scanning the text for emphasis. "The AIM, as written on page 314, Clause 4b, states that any property found in substantial violation must be forcibly acquired by the majority shareholder for immediate corrective action in line with modern historical standards." Michael paused, letting the words sink in. He then pointed to Mrs. O'Connor's modest storefront. "But you forgot the tiny clause." He turned the page around, highlighting a minuscule, parenthetical addition on the same line. "This is the escape clause. Buried deep in the legal jargon of the AIM, right here, provided that said property was erected or significantly renovated after the official designation of the surrounding area as a Historic Preservation District, HPD, in 1965. A collective gasp went around the small crowd of onlookers, including Mrs. O'Connor, who finally understood. Michael continued, his voice rising in triumph. The Book Nook, owned by Mrs. O'Connor's family for generations, was established in 1952. Its last significant renovation, the addition of the current facade, was completed in 1961. For years before the HPD was legally designated in 1965. He lowered the paper. Therefore, the Book Nook, by virtue of its age, is legally grandfathered out of the aesthetic integrity mandate. Thorne paled. He sputtered, That is a clerical error. That clause was meant to protect. It was meant to protect the existing, genuinely old structures. Michael finished for him. The ones you couldn't tear down 20 years ago. You included it to appear thorough, never thinking a minority shareholder would ever try to save a property as insignificant as a small bookstore. You built a legal trap, Mr. Thorne, but in your arrogance, you forgot to check the historical date of the property you intended to demolish first. The victory wasn't just in the law, it was in the execution. Michael hadn't argued legal definitions or aesthetic merits. He had used Thorne's own rules, meticulously researched, to destroy the foundation of Thorne's argument. The power shutdown had merely been the distraction, the loud moment that bought him the time to deliver the quiet, devastating legal truth. The board chairman, Dr. Allenby, whose reputation was now on the line, turned furiously to Thorne. Elias, you presented this specific property to us. You assured us of its non-compliance. If Mr. Jordan's claim holds true, this entire assessment is invalid, and you face charges of misuse of the board's authority. Ms. Chan, already dialing her office, confirmed the devastating impact. The city registry confirms the 1961 date. The mandate is inapplicable, Elias. The review failed. Thorne's face was a mask of cold fury and defeat. The entire street was silent, waiting for his response. He had lost, not to a louder bully, but to a quieter, more meticulous mind. He had laughed at Michael's meekness, but Michael's meekness was a shield for his integrity, allowing him to endure the weight until he found the weak point. You win this skirmish, Jordan. Thorne ground out, his voice shaking with humiliation. But I still hold 60%. I will find another way. No, you won't. Michael stated simply. He walked over to the crowd of reporters and spoke loud enough for the tenants and the city officials to hear. Mr. Thorne, while the power is off for the necessary maintenance that your neglect required, I am announcing my final move. The integrity mandate I am proposing is not aesthetic, it is moral. Today, I am using the emergency clause to sign long-term, fixed-rate leases, 30 years minimum, with Mrs. O'Connor and every other small, established business in this block. These leases ensure their rents are tied only to property taxes, not to the whims of corporate greed. He looked directly at the cameras. If Mr. Thorne wishes to sell his 60% stake in Ascension Properties, he knows where to find me. Until then, any attempt to interfere with the newly guaranteed stability of these local businesses will be met with immediate legal action, financed fully by my own foundation. You chose to fight the wrong fight, Mr. Thorne. Michael turned back to the defeated man. You wanted control. I wanted justice. You mistook my respect for the rules as fear of confrontation. You were wrong. Mrs. O'Connor, who had been silently watching the entire exchange, finally broke the tension. She rushed to Michael, tears streaming down her face. You knew about the dates, didn't you? The Book Nook is safe? The Book Nook is safe, ma'am, Michael said, finally allowing a small, genuine smile to break through. And now, so is everyone else. He turned to his lawyer. Miss Hayes, please inform the utility crew that they have precisely 1 minute to turn the power back on. I believe our repairs are complete. Michael B. Jordan didn't wait for the power to return. He simply walked back to his car, leaving Elias Thorne standing alone in the silent, darkened street his arrogance exposed and his power neutralized by a single, tiny clause on page 314. In the weeks that followed, Thorne tried to rally support, but the combination of the humiliating public defeat and the ensuing investigation into the misuse of the assessment board's authority shattered his reputation. With the small businesses secured by ironclad leases, Thorne's properties lost their redevelopment value, and he was forced to sell his 60% stake. Michael B. Jordan bought it. He did not gloat. He simply returned to his initial plan, investing in infrastructure, restoring the integrity of the buildings, not for aesthetic vanity, but for the safety and stability of the people who worked there. He funded a local foundation dedicated to preserving Charleston's authentic character, ensuring that the city's heart was defined by its people and history, not by corporate luxury brands. He learned that the loudest victories are often won through the quietest preparation. His meekness was revealed not as a character flaw, but as the calculated poise of a man who lets his homework do the talking. The quiet strength of integrity, fueled by meticulous focus, had triumphed over the loud posturing of greed. The book nook got new wiring, a freshly painted sign, and a guarantee for its next 30 years. And in Charleston, nobody laughed at Michael B. Jordan anymore. They simply called him the Protector.